She escaped her toxic Mafia husband, but the black cop beside her was hired to bring her back in cuffs. His voice shattered the silence like glass. "You think you can walk out on me, Isabella?" He slammed his fist into the marble counter, the vibration making the crystal glasses tremble. She stood frozen, her breath shallow, eyes darting between the gun on the table and the man she once called her husband. Marco Russo, the name that made grown men flinch. The man who smiled at the police chief one night and buried a traitor the next. And tonight, he was smiling that same cruel smile at her. Her lip bled from where he'd grabbed her face moments before, forcing her to look at him. "After everything I gave you? After every damn thing I built?" His voice cracked with venom. "You think you can just disappear?" Her mind screamed for silence. Every word he spat was another reminder that she was property, not a partner. His fingers tightened around her chin, dragging her closer until she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Answer me," he demanded. But she didn't. She didn't even blink. Because if she did, he'd see the tears, and tears gave him power. Then she did something she hadn't done in 3 years of living under his shadow. She fought back. She slammed her knee into his ribs, hard, breaking free from his grip. His roar filled the penthouse. The gun slid off the counter, clattering across the floor. She didn't wait. She grabbed her purse, snatched the car keys, and ran barefoot out the door. The elevator took too long. She bolted down the emergency stairs, heart hammering, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Somewhere above, she heard him yelling orders. His men were moving. She could almost hear the echo of his words following her down the stairwell. "Find her. Now!" Her fingers shook as she started the car. The tires screeched out of the driveway, city lights blurring into streaks as she sped through the night. The storm outside matched the one inside her, fierce, unrelenting, and full of fury. She didn't care where she was going. Just away. Away from the cage that called itself a marriage. Away from Marco Russo, the man who had bloodstains behind designer suits. Away from the empire built on fear. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? What time is it in your city? And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button because what's about to happen next, you won't believe. The city blurred into countryside before she realized she'd been driving for hours. The rain hadn't stopped, and neither had her shaking hands. The gaslight blinked red. She was running out. She spotted a dimly lit bus stop near the edge of the highway, the kind no one ever used. A sign said Route 39 eastbound. She didn't think. She just parked the car and ran through the downpour. A single bus pulled up. The driver looked half asleep, but she didn't care. She paid cash, took the first empty seat, and tried not to look back. Her hair clung to her face, soaked and messy. Her sweater smelled like rain and fear. She pressed her forehead against the window, her reflection barely visible. Every headlight behind her felt like a ghost chasing her down. That's when he sat beside her. Broad shoulders, dark skin glistening with rain, sharp eyes that missed nothing. A police badge peeked from under his jacket. He gave her a nod, a polite smile, the kind that said safe, but nothing in her world was safe anymore. She didn't speak. Neither did he, but something in his silence felt too deliberate, too professional. Her instinct screamed. She turned slightly, just enough to see the outline of a radio in his coat pocket. He wasn't just a passenger. Her pulse spiked again. She looked out the window. They were crossing the bridge now, city lights fading into blackness. One wrong move, and she could vanish off the map forever. She clenched her fists. She'd come too far to go back now. But his gaze lingered too long. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost gentle. "Rough night." She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You could say that." He nodded slowly. Long road ahead. There was something about his tone, steady, almost rehearsed, that made her skin crawl. She'd heard voices like that before. Men who sounded sympathetic until they made the call that ended everything. Her heart pounded in her ears. She looked down and saw a small scar near his wrist, a faint burn mark. Military, maybe, or something worse. The bus rattled along the wet road, each turn of the wheels echoing like a countdown. She couldn't let him know, couldn't let him see the fear. He turned toward her again. "You from around here?" She hesitated, just passing through. He nodded, eyes narrowing slightly, like he was piecing something together. Then, with quiet precision, his hand brushed against his jacket, not reaching for the gun, just checking it was still there. Routine, controlled, trained. That's when she knew. He wasn't just some cop heading home. He was waiting for her. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to stay calm, but the walls of the bus felt like they were closing in. Every second he sat beside her was another second closer to being dragged back to Marco, back to that golden prison, back to the man who thought love meant ownership. Her mind raced. She needed an exit, a distraction, anything. The bus slowed for a stop sign. One old man stood outside in the rain, holding a cane and a grocery bag. She saw her chance. She stood, pretending to stretch, her hand gripping the metal pole for balance. The cop watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. When the doors opened, she moved. Fast. She shoved past the man and bolted into the storm, her shoes splashing through puddles as thunder roared overhead. Behind her, the cop shouted something. Not angry, just firm. Professional. Ma'am, stop. But she didn't stop. She ran harder, her breath tearing from her lungs, her heart a drumbeat of panic. The rain soaked her clothes until they clung to her skin, cold and heavy. She slipped on the wet asphalt but kept running, headlights slicing through the dark behind her. He was coming. She could hear his footsteps, heavy, steady, closer every second. She darted behind an abandoned gas station, crouching low behind a dumpster, forcing herself to breathe silently. Lightning flashed, revealing his silhouette on the road. He wasn't running anymore, just walking. Slow, purposeful, like a predator who already knew where the prey would hide. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. One last text from an unknown number. "You can't run from me, Bella." Her heart stopped. The message wasn't from Marco. It was from a new number, and she realized, with a cold rush of terror, that the man who'd sent it wasn't her husband. It was the cop standing 20 feet away, looking directly at her hiding spot. Her chest burned as if her lungs were filled with fire, rain running in her eyes, heart slamming against her ribs so hard it hurt. She stared at the cop's silhouette through the sheets of rain, frozen like prey caught in headlights. He didn't shout again. He didn't move fast. He just walked, deliberate, boots splashing through puddles like he had all the time in the world. And maybe he did. Maybe he already had her cornered. The phone in her trembling hand kept glowing with that single message, mocking her with the truth. "You can't run from me, Bella." Her stomach twisted. No one called her Bella, except Marco. Not even her friends. Which meant this cop wasn't just some random bounty hunter. He'd been briefed. He knew her, maybe even watched her before tonight. She'd been tracked. She pressed the power button, the screen went black, and she shoved the phone deep into the puddle beside her, watching it vanish under muddy water. No more signals. No more calls. Just her and him now. His voice cut through the storm, calm and smooth like he wasn't even winded. "Come on out, Isabella. You'll catch a cold hiding in the trash." Her pulse spiked. The way he said her name, too familiar, too certain, made her blood freeze. He was closer now. She could hear the jingle of metal, the faint clink that could only be handcuffs. She pressed her back against the dumpster, every muscle shaking, eyes scanning for anything to use. A loose pipe lay half buried in the mud beside her foot. She gripped it tight. Her knuckles whitened. He turned the corner. His figure emerged, tall and broad, the rain running down his jacket like oil. His eyes locked on hers. No smirk, no taunt, just the kind of steady gaze killers had when they knew the ending already belonged to them. She swung the pipe. He caught it midair. Lightning flashed, revealing the strain in his jaw, the veins in his forearm as he twisted, forcing it from her grip. She tried to kick him, clawed his jacket, anything, but he pinned her easily, her back slamming against the cold brick wall. Rain poured between them, washing blood and dirt from her lip. She thrashed against his hold, but his arm was iron across her chest. His face hovered inches from hers, eyes hard, voice low enough that she could feel the rumble against her skin. "You shouldn't have run, Isabella." Her teeth clenched. "You don't know what he's capable of." He stared at her for a moment, rain dripping from his eyelashes. Maybe he was waiting for fear, waiting for her to break. Instead, she shoved her knee upward, catching his thigh and forcing him to stumble just enough for her to slip free. She bolted again. The adrenaline in her veins felt like acid, eating her alive but keeping her moving. She didn't know where the road went, didn't care. She just ran. Gravel bit into her feet, her wet clothes weighing her down, but she didn't stop. The darkness ahead was safer than the man behind. A car engine roared somewhere far off. For a second, hope flared. Someone else, maybe help, but then a black SUV's headlights sliced through the storm. Her heart sank. She knew that car. Marco's men. She dove into a ditch by the roadside as the SUV slowed, two figures inside, scanning the rain. She pressed a hand over her mouth, forcing herself not to breathe too loud. The cop had stopped at the edge of the road, eyes flicking between her hiding spot and the vehicle. She waited for him to wave them over, to sell her out for whatever price Marco promised. But he didn't. Instead, he stepped out, right into the middle of the road, raising his badge in the beam of their headlights. The SUV braked hard. The men shouted something, voices muffled by the storm. The cop shouted back, something about federal investigation, obstruction of justice, whatever excuse he used to push them off. The car idled for a tense few seconds before pulling away, taillights vanishing into the darkness. She couldn't process it. Why hadn't he turned her in? Why cover for her if he was sent to bring her back? He turned his head slowly, scanning the ditch until his eyes met hers again. No words, no gestures, just that unreadable look. Then he walked toward her, slow and steady. She crawled backward, mud coating her palms, until her back hit a rock. He stopped a few feet away. "You think I don't know what that man does to people?" he said, voice low, just above the thunder. "You think I take orders from him?" Her throat tightened. "Then why are you following me?" "Because if I didn't, someone worse would." The words hit her like a slap. She didn't know whether to believe him or run again. He looked at her, the kind of look that carried too many secrets, too many regrets. He reached into his coat. She flinched, expecting the glint of metal. But instead, he tossed her a small keychain flashlight. "You'll freeze to death out here." Then he turned his back and started walking down the road. She sat there, shaking, rain dripping from her hair, trying to make sense of the chaos. He could have cuffed her, could have dragged her back to Marco right then. But he didn't. Either he was playing some deeper game, or he wasn't the enemy she thought he was. She forced herself to move. Her whole body hurt, but staying meant dying. She followed him, keeping her distance, the tiny flashlight barely cutting through the rain. After a few miles, they reached an abandoned rest stop. The roof had half caved in, but it was dry enough to catch her breath. He stood by the doorway, checking his watch, radio still clipped to his chest. She watched him carefully. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. No wasted motion. He'd been trained to hunt people like her. And yet, when he finally looked at her again, there was something almost human behind the exhaustion in his eyes. "You got a name you want me to use?" She hesitated. "Anna." He smirked faintly. "Liar." The way he said it wasn't mocking, just matter of fact. She looked away. "Fine. Bella then." He nodded. "Good. That's the one your husband screams at his men every time they fail to find you." Her stomach turned. He'd been close enough to hear that. How long had he been following her? He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching the storm outside. "Marco doesn't want you dead." "Not yet." She swallowed hard. "What does he want, then?" "Control. The same thing men like him always want." The silence between them was thick enough to choke on. For the first time in years, someone had said the truth out loud, without flinching. But that didn't make him safe. It just made him dangerous in a different way. Her mind raced. If he wasn't working directly for Marco, then who was pulling his strings? The badge could mean anything: a cover, a deal, a personal vendetta. Whatever it was, she couldn't afford to trust him. The wind howled outside, the rain softening into a mist. He turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing at something in the distance. She followed his gaze and saw a flicker of headlights far down the road. Another vehicle approaching fast. He cursed under his breath, pulling out his gun, checking the chamber. "Stay down," he said, tone clipped. She froze. The roar of the engine grew louder. Black vans. Not police. Not federal. Marco's convoy. He didn't wait for orders. He grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the back door. Move. She struggled to keep up, her legs weak from running, but his grip was firm, steady. They burst into the trees behind the building just as the van screeched to a stop in front. Voices shouted, doors slammed. Flashlights cut through the fog. She could barely breathe. Branches scratched her arms as he pulled her deeper into the forest, weaving between the trunks like he'd memorized the terrain. Gunfire cracked in the distance. She stumbled, nearly falling, but he caught her before she hit the ground. They ran until her legs gave out. He stopped only when the shouts faded behind them, both of them collapsing against a fallen tree, lungs burning. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain dripped from the branches above, mixing with sweat and blood. She turned to him, eyes wide. "Why are you helping me?" He stared ahead, jaw tight, voice low. "Because the last woman I was ordered to bring back didn't make it alive." The words sank in her like ice. He stood, wiping mud from his hands, scanning the darkness again. "We need to move before they circle back." She looked up at him, soaked and trembling, realizing the truth she'd been running from since she met him on that bus. He wasn't her enemy, but he wasn't her savior either. He was something in between, the kind of man who could save her life or end it in the same heartbeat. And as the sound of distant engines rumbled again through the night, she understood one terrifying thing. Marco wasn't giving up this time. He was coming himself. The engines in the distance grew louder, a low thunder rolling through the forest, vibrating in the ground beneath their feet. Isabella's breath hitched. He was coming. Not his men. Him. Marco Russo didn't chase people. He sent people to chase for him. But when he came himself, it meant one thing. He wasn't letting go this time. The cop turned, scanning the dark with sharp precision. His body tensed, every muscle alert. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a spare magazine, slid it into his weapon, the click echoing through the wet silence. His jaw flexed as he looked at her, rain sliding down his cheek. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't sure if protecting her was worth dying for. She felt the panic rise again, the kind that claws up from your stomach until it chokes you. Her mind screamed to run, but her body couldn't move. She was trapped between a man who wanted her dead and another who was paid to deliver her. He grabbed her wrist suddenly, pulling her close enough that she could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "If you want to live, you listen to me now. No hesitation, no questions. You run when I say run. You stop when I say stop. You do that, you might see another sunrise." She nodded, breathless, her pulse pounding in her ears. He looked at her for a second longer, then turned and started moving, silent, fast, cutting through the trees like he'd done this 100 times. She followed, stumbling but keeping up, each step splashing through mud, branches whipping her face. Behind them, the forest exploded with headlights and shouting. Marco's convoy had arrived. Dozens of men with flashlights and rifles fanned out, combing through the dark. The sound of their boots was everywhere, getting closer. The cop stopped suddenly, pulling her down beside a fallen log. He pressed a finger to his lips. She held her breath. A flashlight beam swept inches above them. Voices shouted orders, search patterns, directions, radio chatter. One man walked so close she could see the glint of a knife at his belt. Her muscles ached from holding still, every nerve begging to scream. But the cop's grip on her arm was steady, grounding her, anchoring her to survival. The men passed. The light faded. He didn't move yet. He waited until the forest swallowed the noise again, then finally exhaled and whispered so quietly it was almost swallowed by the rain. "Move." They crawled forward, low and silent, until the ground sloped downward toward a small clearing. At the far edge stood an old truck half covered by a tarp. He motioned toward it, and she understood. They sprinted. The rain had eased, but the wind carried the distant sound of barking dogs. Marco's men were unleashing everything. She reached the truck first, yanking the tarp away. It smelled like rust and old oil, but the keys were still in the ignition. She looked at him. He nodded once. "Go." The engine roared to life with a sputter. The moment it did, lights flashed behind them. Someone shouted. The cop fired twice, the muzzle flash lighting up his face, hard and determined. Bullets ripped through the air. She slammed the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward, fishtailing across the wet ground, bouncing onto the dirt road. He jumped in beside her, slamming the door as another round of gunfire shattered the back window. She gripped the wheel, knuckles white, heart racing. He was shouting directions, left, then right, then down the narrow road that cut through the hills. The truck rattled violently, tires skidding on the slick mud, but she didn't stop. He reloaded, his eyes scanning the mirror. They're tailing us. 2 SUVs, maybe 3. Her throat tightened. He leaned out the window, fired again, hitting a tire. One vehicle spun out, crashing into a ditch. Another kept coming. She could feel the heat of adrenaline flooding through her veins. The road curved sharply, and she turned the wheel too hard. The truck skidded, spun sideways, and slammed into a tree. The air left her lungs in a rush. Her head hit the steering wheel, pain exploding behind her eyes. The world spun. For a second, everything went silent. Then hands grabbed her shoulders. She blinked. The cop was pulling her out, shouting for her to move. The truck was smoking. She stumbled into the rain again, dizzy and shaking. He half dragged her up the slope beside the road as gunfire cracked behind them. They dove into the brush, crawling through roots and mud until they reached the cover of rocks. She gasped for breath, chest heaving, mud streaking her face. He crouched beside her, checking the weapon, scanning the trees. 1 bullet left, maybe 2. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. We're not making it out together if they surround us. Her mind snapped at the words. You're not leaving me. He stared for a moment, then gave the faintest nod. No, I'm not. The roar of engines grew closer again. Marco's voice cut through the chaos, smooth and deadly. Bella, enough of this. You think he can protect you from me? You think you can hide in the mud like a rat? Her body froze. That voice had lived in her nightmares for years. Hearing it again made her knees buckle. She clamped a hand over her mouth, but a small sob escaped anyway. Marco's footsteps were slow, deliberate. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was savoring it. The hunt. The power. The cop stood, gun raised, eyes locked on the movement in the shadows. He whispered without looking at her. When I say run, you go left. Don't stop for anything. She shook her head, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks. He didn't look back. He fired. The forest lit up. Chaos erupted. Marco's men returned fire. She screamed as a bullet tore into the tree beside her. He grabbed her hand, yanking her down the slope. They ran blindly through the rain, crashing through brush, bullets slicing the air around them. She didn't look back until the gunfire stopped. When she did, the cop wasn't beside her. Her heart stopped. She turned in circles, searching through the mist. Then she saw him, lying half-covered by leaves, one hand clutching his shoulder, blood dark against his jacket. She ran to him, falling to her knees. He groaned, trying to push her away. Go. You have to go. She shook her head violently. Not without you. He gritted his teeth, trying to stand. Blood poured through his fingers. They're closing in. You run. You make it. I stay. They follow me. She heard the engines again, closer now. She knew he was right, but she couldn't move. Couldn't leave him there to die for her. He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes softened. Please, don't waste it. Something inside her broke. She grabbed his radio from his belt, tore it free, and sprinted into the darkness. Her legs burned, her breath came in ragged gasps, but she didn't stop. The radio crackled in her hand, voices barking orders, directions. She turned it on full volume and threw it into the opposite direction, letting it draw them away from him. She ran until she couldn't hear the engines anymore. Her body trembled violently, exhaustion hitting like a wall. She collapsed beside a fallen tree, clutching her side, the taste of blood in her mouth. Her vision blurred. Somewhere behind her, she heard one last gunshot echo through the night. Then silence. Her heart stopped. She didn't know if it was his or theirs. She didn't even know if she wanted to find out. Minutes felt like hours. The rain had turned into mist again, cold against her skin. She crawled forward, every part of her screaming in pain, until she saw headlights again, but this time softer, smaller. A truck. Civilian. She stumbled toward it, waving weakly. The driver stepped out, an older woman wrapped in a shawl, eyes wide with concern. "Are you all right, miss?" Isabella nodded weakly, voice cracking. "I just need to get away. Anywhere." The woman helped her into the cab, started the engine, and drove off toward the open road. The hum of the tires was the only sound. Isabella leaned her head against the cold glass, eyes heavy. But as the road stretched ahead, a strange unease coiled in her gut. She glanced at the dashboard. A small radio sat there, crackling faintly with police chatter. A familiar voice came through, deep, calm, measured. "Target confirmed alive. En route." Her blood ran cold. She turned slowly toward the woman beside her. The driver smiled faintly, eyes hard in the glow of the dashboard lights. "Relax, dear. Marco just wants to talk." The woman's grip on the steering wheel was steady, too steady. The rain tapped softly on the windshield, but Isabella's pulse was a storm of its own. That voice on the radio, the calm, low tone she knew too well, echoed in her head. "Target confirmed alive. En route." Her whole body tensed. She turned slightly toward the driver, her voice barely a whisper, her throat raw from running and screaming in fear. "Who are you?" The woman smiled faintly without looking away from the road. "To someone who knows how this story ends." Isabella's stomach dropped. The woman's eyes in the mirror flashed cold, familiar, disciplined. She wasn't some random rescuer. Marco had planned this. Every move, every escape, every false sense of safety. He'd been 2 steps ahead from the start. But he'd made one mistake, underestimating how far she'd go when she had nothing left to lose. She reached down slowly, fingers brushing the glove compartment. The woman's eyes flicked toward her. Too late. Isabella yanked it open. A gun clattered out, heavy, cold metal landing in her palm. The woman reacted fast, swerving the truck, trying to wrestle control, but Isabella had already aimed. The sound of the shot shattered the quiet. The truck jerked violently, tires screeching on the wet asphalt before spinning out. It slammed into a ditch, metal crunching, glass shattering, silence swallowing the night. Isabella's head rang. The airbag had exploded, smoke curling in front of her eyes. She shoved it aside and crawled out, knees scraping against gravel, chest burning with every breath. The woman in the driver's seat wasn't moving. Isabella staggered to her feet, clutching the gun, shaking but alive. She stumbled down the road. The forest opened into a long stretch of industrial ruins. Warehouses, silos, a half-collapsed bridge. The kind of place Marco used for meetings that never made it into police reports. And standing under a broken streetlight ahead, waiting like he'd been there the whole time, was Marco, Russo himself. Black suit, soaked but immaculate. One hand in his pocket, the other holding a pistol pointed lazily at the ground. His smile was calm, too calm. "You made me come out here myself, Bella. You always did know how to make things messy." Her grip tightened on the gun. The rain washed down her face, mixing with tears she didn't even feel anymore. "You ruined everything you touched," she said, voice shaking but clear. "You turned love into a sentence." He laughed softly. "Love? You think this was ever about love? You were my insurance, my leverage, and now you're just a liability I need to erase." A sound broke the tension, footsteps behind her. Her stomach twisted as she turned. The cop. He was limping, blood still fresh on his shoulder, but alive. He raised his gun slowly, eyes locked on Marco. Marco's smile widened. Well, the loyal dog survives. I knew my money didn't go to waste." Isabella froze. Money. The word hit her like a punch. She looked between them. The cop's jaw clenched, rain dripping from his chin. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said quietly. Marco chuckled, almost fondly. "You should have delivered her hours ago. Instead, you caught feelings. How disappointing." Her chest caved in. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. The cop didn't deny it. His silence told her everything. Marco raised his pistol. "This ends now." The gunfire exploded before she could think. 3 shots, 2 from the cop, 1 from Marco. the air filled with the echo of violence. She screamed as the cop fell, clutching his chest. Marco staggered back, blood spreading across his suit, eyes wide with shock. He looked at her like he couldn't believe she'd actually pulled the trigger. But she had. The gun trembled in her hands, smoke curling up like the ghost of everything he'd taken from her. He collapsed onto the wet ground, the light fading from his eyes. She stood over him, chest heaving, her reflection staring back from a puddle beside his body. A woman she barely recognized, soaked, shaking, but finally free. The cop coughed, voice weak. "You shouldn't have come back for me." She dropped beside him, pressing her hands to his wound. "Don't talk. You're not dying on me." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that broke her heart all over again. "I never took the money. Not after I saw what he did to you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flash drive, slick with blood. "Everything's here. Bank accounts, deals, names. I was going to use against him. You finish it." She shook her head, tears falling freely now. "You finish it with me." But his eyes were already glazing, his body going still in her hands. The world blurred. The rain fell harder, washing away the blood, the lies, the years of fear. She screamed into the night until her voice was gone. By the time the sirens appeared on the horizon, she was sitting beside his body, clutching the flash drive, staring at Marco's corpse in the distance. The flashing lights painted the world red and blue, a cruel mix of justice and pain. When the police surrounded her, guns raised, she didn't fight. She stood slowly, dropped the weapon, and handed over the drive. "It's all there," she whispered. "Everything he built. Burn it down." Months later, the headlines told the story she could barely read. Marco Russo's empire falls. Over 200 arrested. Federal investigation destroys Mafia network. The news anchors called her the ghost wife who brought down a crime family. They didn't mention the man who'd helped her, the man whose name she never even knew. But she remembered him. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face in that storm. The man who started as her captor and ended as her savior. The one who made her believe that justice wasn't always clean, but it could still be real. 1 year later, she stood on the edge of a quiet pier, sunrise breaking through the fog. Her hair was shorter now, her hands steady. She dropped a single dog tag into the water, the one she'd found in his pocket the night everything ended. It hit the surface and sank slowly, disappearing into the deep. She smiled for the first time in years. It wasn't a smile of victory. It was peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop running. Because she'd won something Marco could never touch. Her freedom. She learned that surviving wasn't just about escaping. It was about reclaiming the parts of yourself that fear tried to erase. Her scars weren't weakness. They were proof that even after the darkest nights, a new dawn still came. If this story had you holding your breath, hit subscribe, drop a comment telling where you're watching from, share it with your friends, and stay tuned, because the next story burns even hotter.